His, his Stuti Chintamani is a great gift of thinking soul's journey. And both Sri Narayana Guru and Bhima Bhoi, they cultivated multidimensional ways of self-realization, self-critique, social critique, and social transformation. And in their work, poetry played a very important role. And therefore, they both worked on religion, spirituality, and social transformations and self transformation. Today, we are enriched and blessed by the presence and presentation of our dear and very dear and insightful friend, Dr. Umar, who is an insightful scholar of history, literature, bhakti, and it has been my good fortune to walk and meditate with him. Dr. Umar has gifted many insightful essays to some of the books I am editing. So it is a joy for us to welcome Dr. Umar. And another significance of this conversation today is Dr. Umar is an insightful scholar of cultural studies. Now, one of the pathology of studies in India is that we have become so much victim of an unreflective kind of parochialism, in the sense that in Indian studies there is very little border crossing. For example, a border crossing engagement with Sri Narayana Guru and Bhima Bhoi, who come from Kerala on the one hand and Odisha on the other. So this little effort is a tribute to Chitta Bhai's border crossing
I think we lost. Hello. I think we lost his connection. So I would like to invite. Okay. Yes, Dr. Umar Nizarudeen, sir, you are invited to deliver your lecture.
Good evening, one and all. I hope I am audible. First of all, I am grateful to Professor Ananta Giri for extending this invitation to this August occasion where we are commemorating the work and life of Professor Siyadas. So we have another August personality in the form of the great Sri Narayana Guru, whom, like Professor Giri just observed, could be called the mother of Indian Renaissance. At the heart of the turn of the century progressive movement in Kerala, we can find the figure of Narayana Guru leading an Advaitic movement. This can be called a minoritization of a majority Vedantic Sanskrit tradition, because Guru was not only trained but also prolific across three languages, namely Malayalam, Tamil, and Sanskrit. In his works, he says that Avanavana Atma Sukhatinai Ajirikinnada Abarana Sukhatinai Varenam. What one observes for one's own goodness must ultimately become beneficial to the other. So the one becomes the other. This is the repurposed Advaita of Sri Narayana Guru, where he brings the majesty of Sanskritic Vedantic tradition to the subaltern masses of Kerala in the Findaisiakal early 20th century. So the greatness of Guru consists in enveloping in his sweetness of love, the jaggery of poetry, the bitter Vedantic truths, of the soul. So like for instance, the greatness of Guru manifested in the poetry of Mahakavi Kumar and Ashan, who wrote famously that the love of the soul is not fleshly, mamsa nibatham, alla ragam. But Guru, the great Guru, would say that actually raga nibatham, alla mamsam. So you should never repudiate your body or the fleshly traditions of the body, whether it is Kathakali or Kudiyattam or Kalaripayattu or Mohiniyattam or Bharatanatyam. Music, the body, the flesh should not be repudiated, because this was a challenge faced. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible. You are audible.
At the turn of the century, Kerala, which the great Swami Vivekananda called a lunatic asylum, the body was marked in terms of not only gender but also caste. Like for instance, the subaltern community to which Mahatma Ayyankali, a close comrade of Guru, belonged, had to wear stone ornaments. They were not allowed to cast off the stone ornaments. The great protest led by Mahatma Ayyankali involved casting away of these ornaments. So not just the wearing of ornaments, but the not wearing of them. The very corporeal self was regimented according to caste in a society where there existed not only untouchability but also unseeability. So the universal love that was articulated by Kumar and Ashan, the great student of Sri Narayana Guru, could not be enveloped, embodied within a caste sharira or a caste body or a jati sharira. So just like this one classical poetry, which has a Nira Shira Viveka, using his Viveka, using his discretion, the great Mahakavi Kumar and Ashan brought forward the bifurcation between the body and the Atman. But not for Guru. Guru very manifestly, his Pambati Chanda or Kundalini Pata, he channelizes, he repurposes Tantra, which he obtained from the Tamil traditions of the great Siddhas, who draw their lineage from Agastya himself, to reclaim the body for the subaltern. Whereas for someone like Kumar and Ashan, who went to Bengal and channelized the energies of the Bengal Renaissance to Kerala, the body had to be repudiated for the sake of solely platonic love, because the body could not contain the universal message of his humanism. But Narayana Guru, turn of the century Kerala, revolutionized our present, our contemporary present, the Kerala with its progressive ethos, 100% literacy and positive female to male ratio, using his boldly repurposed Tantra, which draws a lot from the Dhwani theory, where the Shaivite energies of the Tandava, the doctrine of vibration, can be seen as manifesting in the suggestion, in the connotation of poetry, like Professor Giri articulated in the introduction. It was in the sweetness of poetry and music that Guru articulated the deep philosophy of the Vedanta for the Malayali masses. So whereas for his premier disciple Kumar and Ashan, the body was something to be repudiated, but for Guru, it was not something to be repudiated, but to be actively embraced. It was a conatus and mind-body fusion that formed the core of Guru's repurposed Advaita. So Guru was a very humorous person who enjoyed life. He was a monk and a monastic of the highest order. At the same time, he was famous for a childish sense of humor. For instance, a person belonging to a different persuasion, a gentleman named D'Souza, approached Sri Narayana Guru with a quaint complaint that his family was being pestered by a poltergeist, which in Malayalam is called a Kuttichata. So Mr. D'Souza went before Guru and submitted a supplication that he be delivered from the perils due to this poltergeist. And Guru was supposed to exorcise as a great spiritual leader of great powers, monastic powers. He was supposed to exorcise this poltergeist from Mr. D'Souza's household. So Guru said, okay, look, Mr. D'Souza, I would do one thing. I would write a petition to the poltergeist that he leave you alone and your family alone. So Guru took a piece of paper, and even today it hangs in the portico of the D'Souza household. Dear Mr. Kuttichatan, you deliver Mr. D'Souza and his family of your naughty habits and leave them alone. And this was the amulet that Sri Narayana Guru gave Mr. D'Souza. And later, when he talked to Mahatma Gandhi during one of the canonical public meetings in Kerala history, Gandhi precisely asked Guru, is it possible to attain moksha through the Vedic tradition? And Guru's very frank reply was that you can attain moksha through any of the paths, any of the spiritual margas available to humans. But Gandhi again specifically asked, is the Vedantic path suitable for moksha? And Guru's answer was famously in the affirmative. But Guru also famously during his time as an Avadhuta, when he spent his time as a youth in the coastal regions of Travancore, he is said to have received the hospitality of the humble Muslim fisherman households, where he is said to have consumed the fish caught by the fishermen and cooked by the women of the coastal regions of Travancore, Tiruvidampur, where he was born in Champaranti. So the Guru is a fascinating and deeply complex figure in this sense. And you can find that you can understand Guru in contemporary universe using the theory of transpositional subject objectivity, because Guru ultimately is a great paradox. So it's a channel through which the energies, Sanatan energy materializes itself in the body of a human figure. So how does this Sanatan energies materialize in the body of a human figure? And this could be understood using the theory of transpositional subject objectivity. Because the body and mind dichotomy, which is the great peril brought forward by René Descartes, must be exercised in favor of a conatus, in favor of the mind-body commingled union through observing it from a material point of view, where you look at it from an object-oriented rather than conceptual view, where there exists no hierarchy. For Guru, the body, this becomes the degree zero of difference, because there is no hierarchy amongst humans in terms of embodiment. So Guru makes a very subtle differentiation between jati and inam, both of which in Malayalam points to kind. So for Guru, there are just two kinds of humans. They are differentiated in terms of the gender, that is the male and the female. So Guru gets rid of every other kind of differentiation through his magisterial corpus, where he observes that the body becomes the locus of difference, where you can find that the body at the same time contains base aspects as well as elevated aspects. So it is not for us to favor the elevated aspects of the body and get rid of the baser aspects of the human body and human energies, which applies to the body politic as well, which applies to the body social as well. So Guru stands for a repurposed Advaita, which we can look at through a parallax of transpositional subject objectivity. Someone who is a Santata Sahajari or a close confidant of Guru, like Kumar and Ashan, would articulate this so eloquently when he says that Namamsa Nibaddham Allara, which again is contradicted by Guru in his corpus through his foregrounding of the Sharira, of the body, which again comprises a transpositional subject-objective parallax. So Guru very efficaciously effects a kind of minoritization of the Vedantic, Sanskritic traditions through his corpus in Tamil as well as Malayalam. For this purpose, he even visited far-off regions like Sri Lanka, which at that point of time was called Ceylon, and he also established a society, the Sri Narayana Dharma Paripalana Yoga. So the great Guru Parampara, the great tradition from prehistoric times, from someone like G. Raman, who wrote for the small people of Uri, of the earth, Uriyil Cherivarka, for the eras, for the subalterns, to the great Sri Narayana Guru, to his disciple Nataraja Guru, to the great Muni Narayana Prasad. The parampara of the great teachers continues, and it manifests in the divine energies, in the embodied figure of the Guru, through which the Sanatan primordial energies are materialized. At the same time, Guru, it goes without saying, was a magisterial iconoclast, because Amal Tiruppankota, who currently works in Japan, who is a great creative scholar from Kerala, has written a short story in which he, of course, says that Guru is the most iconized figure in Kerala and perhaps all of India. And he leads a procession of icons, and in the end, Guru comes forward and demolishes each and every icon that proliferates the capital city of Kerala. In that sense, Guru, the greatest of the icons of modern progressive Kerala, also is the greatest iconoclast. It again comprises a transpersonal subject-objective paradox, which forms a manifold through which we can make sense of this extremely complex, universal thought of a great soul like Sri Narayana Guru. The text and life, words and process of Guru flow into each other in one single continuum of dynamic movement, where you cannot find a dichotomy between the body and the word. The word itself is the body. The word itself becomes the flesh. There is a union, a unison of word and body in the adhyatmic, in the spiritual tradition of Narayana Guru. It is not purely idealistic, nor is it purely material. So, in Pampattichinta, one of Guru's greatest compositions, he uses this very body-mind union to foreground the greatness of the spirit. So Pampattichinta still remains one of the most popular loci of awakening in progressive Kerala. Like Professor Giri pointed out, this is the reason we can call Sri Narayana Guru the greatest Renaissance leader in contemporary India, because it is too early for us to prognosticate the far-reaching impacts of the teachings of Guru. Like, for instance, the great Nitya Chaitanya Yeti said that one should have oceanic knowledge just to begin to understand the Guru. Just to begin to understand Guru is the beginning of knowledge, is the beginning of freedom. So again, Guru has been criticized for not foregrounding the national movement as part of his Sanatan project. But again, this again comes down to the way the national movement has been framed in a Eurocentric fashion, where Sanatan spiritual elements have been exorcised from the body politic. The very vernacular word of modernity in Malayalam and Tamil that Guru foregrounded has found no place in the Anglophone academia, in the history writing establishment we have founded post-independence. As a result, a great spiritual leader and also his teachings, as well as the corpus of writings, have been removed from our theorization of our own national movement, where on the other hand, we find Jacques Derrida or Michel Foucault were great exemplars in their own right in the very formulation of our liberation and our freedom and our modernity and our post-modernity. Whereas a great thinker like Guru finds no place in the way the national movement has been framed in modern Indian history. So Guru himself was a shepherd of being. Shepherd of being. This is the term that has been used for another great poet, but not a spiritual leader, Hölderlin, in Germany, where he was called by Martin Heidegger as the shepherd of being. Unma, or being, the Malayali being, the Indian being, was preserved from fragmentation through the colonial times, through the tumultuous upheavals of the turn of the century by the spiritual renaissance and awakening that was produced by Sri Narayana Guru and the great movement that he led that went beyond religion, caste, and creed. So the very vernacular modernity of Narayana Guru foregrounds the universality of the human, of which he accepts just two kinds of inam, that is the male and the female. So here, the excess of spirituality in Guru is consistent with an excess of meaning. There is an excess of meaning in Guru. So we have to go through each and every line again and again and again. Like a great repository of Guru thought today is Muni Narayana Prasad and the leaders of the Shivagiri Matham in Kerala, who are still involved in the exegesis of Guru's thinking. The excess of Guru's thought is postulated upon the non-orientable nature of the subject-object affect. So the difference of affect from emotion is that emotion doesn't consider the body as worth taking note of, but affect, on the other hand, is bodily. So Guru's corpus, his teachings, his values, his ethos are bodily ethos and must be understood in affective terms and not in emotional terms. There is a fusion of the body, mind, and affect. So it still needs to be framed in the proper way, because our Eurocentric notions of modernity are flawed because they are not autochthonous and not able to articulate, embody the ethos of Sri Narayana Guru. So voice is a therapeutic channel of poetry as well as in affect and thought in Guru. So one becomes aware of this embodied voice very rarely. So in the chanting, the articulation of poetry, like for instance, the Pampaticham, one becomes aware of the body, one becomes aware of the voice. It is true, this is a voice that one reaches into the core of the history, existence, and being of the subaltern. Like Gayatri Chakrabarti's Piva could later formulate that the subaltern cannot speak. But the voice that was provided, the subaltern, by a great leader like Guru must be taken note of. Because the voice is an embodied tradition. It contains primordial energies of the human, the para, pashyadi, khara, and vaikri, the Paravaram, the Sagar, the ocean of voice, of phonemes is articulated through our articulatory mechanisms like the voice box. So the question has been reformulated not as can the subaltern speak, but as can the bourgeois listen. So it is up to us to listen to the message brought forward by Guru and his repurposed Advaita, Tantra, and Vedanta, which became available to the masses of Kerala in such a way that the progressive literate ethos of the state have become exemplary, although in a limited capacity today. And all of that we owe to the teachings of. In no way can be iconized or made into a figure, but a living presence, a living organic presence. While saying that, one should not reduce the great conceptual edifice of Srinarayana thought and Vedantic thought, because that would mean that the subalterns don't have the entitlement to conceptual thought, because the grand conceptual edifices of Sankhya and Vaisheshika have been cast to the dustbin, but not for Guru. The subaltern has the entitlement for the great conceptual traditions of India and grand systems of systematic thinking, which is the need of the hour. Even when one speaks from an embodied posture, one has to keep in mind the entitlement of the subaltern for conceptual thinking and conceptual structures of thought. It is not merely through post-structuralism and Derrida that we can look at the teachings of Guru, because he was a great system builder, from the Sri Narayana movement to the Shivgiri Mutt to the grand ethos of contemporary Kerala, or something as infinitesimally small as the design of a hostel in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. You can observe the far-reaching effect of Guru's teaching. I say this because my mother studied far away from her own native village in a girls' hostel called SNV Sadanam, Sri Narayana Vilasam Sadanam, Thiruvananthapuram, because that hostel was designed for girl students by none other than the great Sri Narayana Guru. And on this note, I would like to conclude, and once again, thank you for having me here and inviting me on this August occasion where we commemorate Professor Chitta Ranjan Das. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for the enlightening and thought-provoking session. Now, I would like to invite our first discussion, Professor Mohanty, sir. Professor Tapan Mohanty, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Randhir. Dr. Randhir, rather. It was a pleasure to to see my senior Professor Giri, and it was equally interesting to listen to the lecture, which was beautifully explained by Professor Umar Nizarudeen. He spoke very, very eloquently about Sri Narayan's. And what is the most important part he talked about, that the Vedantic Sanskritic tradition, of which the great Guru was very much aware of, like Ramana Maharshi and others, but he wanted to bring it into from a celestial level to an individualistic and earthy, and then wanted to transformation of human spirit, human values, and revolutionize the traditions and customs around them, which you felt are both unequal and unsavory. So it is in this extent that it was not merely spiritual journey, a spiritual transformation, but it was also an embodiment of a confrontation with the existing ritualistic patterns and existing divisions and cleavages in society, and particularly in the form of caste. So that was a very, very lucid understanding of the thing. And he has also brought that dimension of Advaita, which talk about non-duality in this conceptualization, which has been secret to or is the standard to Indian philosophical tradition. But I must take a break here and to explain the other one, which you may not discuss now, but I don't know, because you talk about Bhima Bhoi. And I will just speak a bit about Bhima Bhoi, because I find the connectivity between Bhima Bhoi and Sri Narayan Guru is very much in the sense, because Bhima Bhoi, unlike Narayan Guru, came from a tribal society. And you would know in our Hindu classical order, even though there is Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, the tribals somehow do not find a place in that. So but unfortunately or otherwise, in our traditions, though there has been a lot of examples of interaction between tribals and non-tribal, including the famous Kiratarjunium by Magha, which talk about the Shiva in the form of a Kirat from a tribal. But and many of our understandings have also, in fact, I come from a state which is called Odisha, and the reigning deity of Odisha, Lord Jagannath, is also a tribal god. So even though despite this, the inclusion of tribals in the mainstreaming of social context and mainstreaming of religion and spirituality has been very, very low. But the best one we think about is in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. It is about Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Now you also think about like similarly to Bhima Bhoi, but Bhima Bhoi was more of a self-incriminating, and a thinker, a person who always placed the social values and the life of others more than himself. He said, whatever I have got, my penance, my learning, my thought, they are no meaning unless until they can be used to the relieving of penury, poverty, and distress of the mankind. And therefore, he said, I would sacrifice everything for that. For example, the line he says, and I quote, I read long years ago when I was a kid, and I think my memory serves me right. And he says, in Odia, I'll translate it. Praninko arato dukho pramito, dekhu keba sahu, moji vana pache narke padi thau, jagato uddhara heu. He is saying, Praninko arato, the problems of the people, if you see, then you cannot bear it. So, and how to do it? And he asked God that to please relieve them of all their pain and anguish and give them to me, even if that means you have to throw me into hell, let it be so. But if at the cost of my sacrifice, if the whole humanity is happy, and any day I will prefer that. No, he says, Moji vana pache nakke padit ho jagat uddhar heu. That's it. Kahe Bhima Bhoi Brahma Sapati, Jali diya mopindaku. He said, hey, O Lord, if you want, you give the curse to me and burn my soul. I have no mind. I don't mind it. But I want your kids, your children, your mankind, your people must live in happiness. Now that is one understanding. But much before, much later that, we also had two greatest Neo-Vedantic philosophers in the form of Vivekananda and Aurobindo. And Sri Chitta Ranjan Das, as you talk about Chitta Bhai, he took into the Aurobindo's philosophy into his mind. And Aurobindo's sacrifice was that Aurobindo realized that India, because he was one of the revolutionary and a very well-read man, and he realized that this transformation of political transformation is possible. But in order to, that is more important transformation, that is spiritual. And interestingly, he took education as the means of social transformation. And therefore, he talked about integral education, which Chitta Bhai took into that, into local level, among the tribals, among the destitutes, among the poor, and become a beacon of light for them, beacon of liberation of them. So I am very, very happy that we are celebrating it, that three diverse and interconnected thinkers and people and who have contributed significantly bringing spiritualism into reality and using it as a means to bring social transformation for the downtrodden. I know if you had time would have permitted, I would also talk about the Odia Bhagavat, the tradition of Dasa, the Panchashakha tradition, but that is not part of our discourse, so I won't talk about that. In fact, when I saw this in one of our group, I immediately asked Randhir that could this is I am so happy that you are bringing it, and Randhir was and they have been very very kind and said, sir, I would invite you to become discussant. And of course, it was a godsend opportunity. I never think second times that no, I will think I am not prepared, nothing like that. I realize if the issue is important, if our thought is important, if the speakers are speaking nicely about a tradition that we should all learn, then I am all for it. So thank you, Randhir, for giving that opportunity. And thank you, Anand Bhai, to coordinate and moderate session. And thank you, Professor Umar, to give a very, very nice, illuminating, illustrating the points of view of Narayan Guru. Many of us just heard him, his writing when he was reading sociology way back in 90s in Jawaharlal University. And with this Satya Guru and SNDP movement, we used a little bit of them, but and the depth you have spoken about and the intensity and the narratives you had given, that's certainly been fabulous. And my sincere thanks to you for enlightening people like us here. Thank you very much, Rami. Now I rest my case, and others to follow.
I think Professor Anant Giri wants to say something, but his network is not up to the mark. So
he's actually in a remote local, as he
Yes,
said, he's actually very remote local tribal area.
yes,
So
yes.
where connectivity, internet is difficult. So that's its problem.
Yes,
So
yes, got him.
if you can hear me, so I
Hmm.
want to thank Dr. Umar, and then this kind of border crossing conversation that Dr. Mohanty and Dr. Umar has set up. For example, body and body and mind as a manifestation of the spirit. And in Bhima Bhoi also, there is a similar engagement with the body as an important part. For example, Bhima Bhoi, his own life, sexuality and body, he was not puritanical, and that is one aspect. And secondly, Bhima Bhoi was also deeply concerned about land, because he comes from the space of the dispossessed, and how, if necessary, in Stuti Chintamani and others, he embodies rage. It is not just, that kind of rage, anger against the system, which leads to inequality, dispossession, hunger. And he says that, and especially the caste system. And so he was not a conventional kind of, poet of religion and spirituality, that kind of the dignity of the body and land, which would make possible the manifestation of the spirit. This is one. And second thing would be that, Advaita Vedanta, that Advaitic tradition in Sri Narayana Guru, which has a notion of fullness. And in Bhima Bhoi, there is a cultivation of Sunya. The spiritual path is, really building Sunya Mandira. And that is a revolutionary movement, because can we think of building temples of Sunya? I think it's a unique, imagination and initiative in world event, And how do we make a temple for Sunya? And it is both, literal as well as symbolic. And that reminds me of a profound challenge that Professor Manoj Das, who is a deep seeker, a writer, and also a traveler with the spirit and humanity, in an essay he poses that you are building temples, but can we build temple for consciousness? In Odia, to put it, Chetanara Devalaya. So I think another point of conversation would be that the Advaita of Sri Narayana Guru, which is also a very creative manifestation, as Dr. Umar was pointing to, the vernacular. And Narayana Guru was not constrained by the fact that, because it is Brahminic and Sanskrit, then the subalterns should not write in that. So that way, Sri Narayana Guru proposes a fundamental challenge to many of the taken for granted notions of subaltern liberation, for example, which Dr. Ambedkar embodied. Dr. Ambedkar also tried to learn Sanskrit, though he may not have written in Sanskrit. But the point is that this Purna, the fullness from Advaita Vedanta, and the Sunya from Bhima Bhoi, and Chitta in his book on Bhima Bhoi, and that is his one of his one early work, and he challenges us because many of the interpreters of Bhima Bhoi, they usually try to link it to Buddhism, that he was a Buddhist or he was inspired by Christian missionaries. But in his and Mahima Dharma, Orisara Mahima Dharma, that came out around 1951 from Santiniketan, Chittabai engages himself with these different interpretations, and he says that no, the Sunyata, the Sunya path of Bhoi is original. It is, and that is very interesting because to read things for nature, it's very easy to link like this request Umar to kindly reflect on the full challenge, fullness and emptiness.
I think we lost his connection. So Professor Giri was asking uh, to share some thought about fullness and emptiness.
Now you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
And so a reformulated Advaita, which would be equally attentive to emptiness and fullness. Yes, so this was my submission, and we can request Dr. Umar to reflect on this, please, because my network might go to the sky at time.
I'm grateful to Professor Giri for these extremely insightful remarks that he has made, especially in the context of Shunyata. Because, hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are
Can you
audible.
hear? So, Sri Narayana Guru famously made a Shiva Pradishtha or installation on the banks of the river Arvipuram near Tiruvananthapuram. And it was a major emergence during turn of the century Renaissance movement in Kerala because as a non-Brahminical person, he was castigated for installing a Shiva statue. It was not a proper statue per se, it was a shard of stone that Narayana Guru had picked up from the river and installed it. And Guru said that this is an Irava Shiva. So this is the greatest installation. So he was making a statement that Shunyata or Parambrahma that Professor Giri just pointed out was being manifested so eloquently through this action of a guru, where the spirituality which fuses the mind-body dichotomy itself is a process in the Arivaram Pradishta of Narayana Guru, the very process of the installation that becomes the great path to enlightenment. The process, which ultimately is a shunyata, the processual shunyata of Bhima that Professor Giri just pointed out is a great exemplar of the installation
Hello. No audio, I
Uh,
think.
Yes,
Here
yes.
and-
Dr. Umar. Dr. Umar, sir, are you there? Okay. I think we lost his connection. So, Professor Giri, sir, are you there? So, sir is taking some time. Now, I would like to invite Professor Gyan Gului. He is our next distinguished discussant to kindly share his.
Thank you very much. I'm audible.
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Thank you very
Yes, sir.
much.
You're audible.
Yes. Well, it was very interesting. I would, I would make two remarks. The first one is, in my opinion, of the meditation of action of Narayan Guru. What impressed me was his famous consecrating the piece of rock by calling it, by saying this is not Brahmi Shiva, but a Dava Shiva, which was, which contained actually very many points. The first one was, let's begin with a reform in a certain sense of the religion, of the consecration, which involves also those who are excluded by the caste system. Is let's begin with a new form of consecration, so that the excluded are accepted, so that we have, so to speak, an alternative of religion which is no more limited to only the high caste system, but which involves, and it is particularly directed to those who are up to now, up to that time, it was, if I am not mistaken, 1888, excluded from the cultus. And so he was, in a certain sense, saying, well, if you, that is, if you upper classes go without us, then we will go without you. That is, we go a direct way of complete reform of the cultus and of the religion. And this was, in my opinion, a decided act against the caste system, which, as I said, involves, in my opinion, many points. And the second one is, I think that is particularly interesting in his meditation is his interpretation, new interpretation of the Advaita Vedanta, because he seems to interpret Advaita Vedanta in a way which is not, which is a refusal of the dualistic form, since the dualistic form would, in a certain sense, legitimate a separation between also the individuals. It is, I have the impression that his interpretation of Advaita Vedanta is functional to his proposal of a new society, which goes without, which abandons the system of the castes, and which divides the castes. That is like, as in the same form in which there is no dualism between Jiva and Atman, so there is no separation and dualism between classes. I think that he had this, he followed the line of Advaita Vedanta also because he saw in the Advaita Vedanta a system which could have a direct implication and mirroring, so to speak, in the new order of society, which he was pleading for, which Narayan Guru was pleading for. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gyan Gului, for asking very deep question. I would request our honorable speaker to kindly note down some of the questions, and then you can reply at the end of the session. Now, I would like to invite Minati Pradhanji to kindly share her view.
Hello. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I thank Dr. Umar Nizarudeen for his deep and insightful presentation on Narayan Guru. And on Bhima Bhoi, actually, I would like to share some personal experience. From this today, 2 days back, when I saw the subject, actually went back to my childhood memory. When in the morning, when you wake up, my grandfather used to play in the radio some bhajans, and mostly it will be at the end and they will say it has been written by the Sant Kavi Bhima Bhoi. So that actually invoked a lot of curiosity in me. I was asking why he is being called Sant Kavi, means saint poet. But it is unfortunate that till now his name has been described as a tribal poet. So then I learned a lot of things, that he was blind and he was illiterate, but still he could write so much of um, poetry, very from heart, by heart he memorized so many things. So all these things I learned from that time. But when I grew up, now only I am able to collect all these philosophies and able to know that what type of great personality he was that time in 1850. He was born in 1850. It means you can think of that time such a revolutionary man. He was a true revolutionary. I mean, he was and one thing also I want to now, I was just thinking, those things, at least a little bit of things that could connect me to these days, what I had learned from my childhood. But I don't know, this Gen Next, they need to know our roots, our traditions, our religion and spirituality. I don't know what type of programs are now being telecasted and whether they will get to touch those things at all. And apart from that, I want to tell few things about the Bhima Bhoi. Actually, he was that time you can say the pattern of that. He was embedded that social justice. He was against that. He was opposing the religious bigotry, caste discrimination, and one thing was so much. What for we just know him, that is was oneness. Oneness means with one God, one society, and one religion. For that, actually, that Professor Mohanty was telling, no, Jagatu Uddhar Heu. That means that was the liberation of entire world. And when he followed that Mahima Dharma, that was called like Yoga Dharma, is the religion of the age. I don't know how much, I don't have much knowledge about that. They were telling that yoga was shifting that time. I mean, like the people, it was a Loka Dharma, like the religion of the mass. So it was the time when the religious was highly discriminated, that divisive tendency, then that selfishness, then the Brahminical dominance. So all these things were there. Among that, he actually established himself by following those things like Advaita and that Sunya. And if you listen to his versions mostly, you find the philosophies on that. And in this time, you cannot probably discuss. And apart from that, there is he was also means for a female education and for secularism and all these things. So I now want to know that Mahima Dharma was like it was different. It was meant to be different, but till we find in that there is still discrimination is there. Like any other Hindu things, they don't allow the females to go to their sanctuary sanctum, and they like some puja and things happened which used to be different. It was only for the meditation and for the self realization and all these things. How and who has, I mean, how it has become like that? It is going in that normal mainstream way, like Hinduism. One more thing also, this Mahima Dharma has also we have that exclusive Oriyan essence is there. Even though the people in the belt of Andhra, Chhattisgarh, Bengal, Telugu, and like that, those people have followed up those things, and many of his poetry has been translated into Bengali and all. But till when you say Mahima Dharma, no, it is like the true essence of Odia. This thing. So if anybody can answer those questions, thank you.
So any other participant, if he or she would like to ask any question, please raise your hand. Okay, now I would like to ask our honorable speaker to kindly respond Professor Gyan Gului question. Dr. Umar sir.
Professor Giri, my connection was missing for a few minutes. So if I could be enlightened as to the content of Professor Gianluigi's question, I'd be so grateful, because could Professor Randhir Kumar Gautam please tell me the question, because I missed that part of Professor Gianluigi's speech, because
Professor
my
Gyan
connection
Gului,
was missing.
please repeat your question in a brief.
No, yes, it was. Excuse me. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yes. Well, it was. Well, it was regarding Advaita Vedanta and the interpretation, the following by Narayan Guru of Advaita Vedanta. I was, so to speak, wondering, asking whether there can be a connection between this interpretation, the following of Advaita Vedanta, and the program of the refusal of the caste system, because I have the impression that Narayan Guru, among other things, found in the conception of Advaita Vedanta the refusal of the dualism of Advaita Vedanta, so to speak, a model for the refusal of separation between the caste system in India, that is, in the same form in which each jiva is connected to Brahman and to Atman. There is not a dualism separation between the individual and the high essence of God. In the same way, there is not a separation between them, but on the contrary, each jiva is a manifestation and of God. In the same way, and as a consequence of this, there cannot be a legitimation for a separation of individuals and of classes of individuals in the society, because the affirmation of equality is a direct consequence of the Advaita Vedanta, and therefore, strictly speaking, no rigid separation between individuals can be legitimated as a consequence of the theoretical future of the theoretical web delivered by Advaita Vedanta. This was my first question. The second question, remarks, so to speak, is I think that I was impressed, at least this is more like impression, by the symbol and program of Narayan Guru, which is, so to speak, synthesized by his consecrating the piece of rock, if I am not mistaken, 1888, but I am not sure of the precise year, for the relegated classes, and he's saying this is not Brahmin Shiva, this is Edzava Shiva, if I am not mistaken, in the quotation, because I think here there are really very many points connected with each other. One is, so to speak, there is a God also for the classes which have been traditionally relegated. That is, there is no justification, no legitimation for a separation in the veneration of God between classes, first. Second, it is like a political program, religious and theological political program, so to speak. That is, if you upper classes go without us, then we find a way to venerate God with Exava Shiva, and we will go without you. That is, in the same way in which you go, pretend to go without us, and to venerate God without us, we will find a way of religion and of course also of society, which goes without you. That is, there is, so to speak, a contraposition, a strong contraposition. This was my second point. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gianluigi Secularba, for that enlightening comment. And it is so fascinating that it has bridged certain gaps in my own understanding of how to approach Narayana Guru, because this always has been a paradox for me, because there is the story of the great Advaitin, Shankaracharya, the grand Advaitin who demolished the Buddhist thought in his Jaitra Yatra throughout India, from south to north and east to west, establishing mathas, the four corners of India. And Lord Shiva himself is said to have come to him in the form of a subaltern tribal person to enlighten him of the emptiness, of the futility of holding caste as a structure. So the more monist you are, the more variegated things seem. And on the other hand, dualist streams, especially Semitic Judeo-Christian streams, appear more egalitarian in the dualistic consumption of God, whether it's Meister Eckhart or other spiritual leaders. The monistic thought, the Advaita Vedanta, often can be qualified as a Vishishta Advaita, as propounded by Madhavacharya. So, if I could draw an example from modern European history, the Yiddish of Franz Kafka, who of course wrote in German, has been called the minoritization of a majority grand tradition. Not a belittling, but a minoritization, because Narayana Guru also was not belittling the grand Vedantic tradition of Advaita, but he was minoritizing that, especially in the level of language. Because Bhartrihari himself says that Jagat Bhashaka Vikalp hai. The world is a manifestation of language ultimately. So, in using the vernaculars like Tamil, which we call today a classical language, and also Malayalam, which is strictly a vernacular language, which is Bhasha and not Sanskrit. So, in this using these Bhashas, so Guru was minoritizing what, if we give it an essential status, is essentially a grand tradition of Advaita Vedanta. So in this minoritization, or Vivek Narayan called this a repurposed Advaita, a qualified monism. Because like Professor Secularba rightly pointed out, the more monistic our preoccupations are in the spiritual realm, the more variegated it seems. And this applies to caste as well. So how could Guru have molded a kind of egalitarian, vernacular, universality, modernity in terms of Advaita Vedanta from a Dravidian location in Kerala? So you could say that, especially using the Siddha tradition of the Tamil Siddha tradition, and the Tantric tradition and the Advaitic tradition are as different as chalk and cheese. So So Advaita is a monistic current. So you have a kind of diversity, a kind of profusion, a multiplicity, a multitude of souths in India, and that multitude also includes a certain monistic current. So you cannot rule out that monism within this multitude. So Advaitic current is that very monism which dominated the entire pluralistic milieu of ancient, primordial Indian thought. But Narayana Guru was repurposing, or to put it in a different vocabulary, was minoritizing the majority tradition of Advaita, Vedanta in his repurposed Advaita. So it was not a Shankara Advaita of the Shankara Smriti that Narayana Guru was in fact propounding. His was a qualified monism, which was a processual kind of thinking, which would segue into your second question about the installation of the Shiva, and which was castigated by the Brahminical elite, and to which Guru so profoundly responded that this is not a Brahmin Shiva, this is a Shiva, the community to which Sri Narayana Guru belonged. So the speech act of that radicalness and that radical transgression of Narayana Guru, like you have so eloquently, so that attempted sacralization of what was not considered sacred. So in that very pratishtapanam, or the installation, in the very process, in the very processual consecration of a non-sacred object into a sacred object by the speech act, by that radical transgression, that a very radical transgression is embodied again in the form of that Shiva temple, which even today is venerated in Arvipuram. So that a processual transgression as a process, ultimately is at the core of a Guru's act. The speech act of transgression of Brahminism with the subalternity of the Irava Shiva, and the reclamation of the Shaivite tradition from the Brahminical clutches is embodied, materialized, and manifested in the installation, process of installation. So in Binale, in Venice, or in Arsenal, the installations are proliferated. So this installation, this process of the installation of the deity itself is the radical act. Of course, the verbal speech act is a part of it. It is in this fusion of the speech act and the embodiment where the voice is not different, but they come together in an Advaitic transgression. So in that way, Guru is a radical critique of tradition. He comes from within that profound tradition in which he was trained by his Guru, Ayyapilla Ashan. So he was trained in the traditional Gurukul format, and he was using that very Vedantic Advaita tradition to critique that very primordial ancient tradition. So this processual critique could be called the hallmark of Sri Narayana thought. Thank you so much for that provoking question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Now, I would like to invite Professor Tapan Mohanty to kindly respond Minati Pradhan's question.
Yeah, I mean, see, she was asking about the tradition of the religious cult, if you can say, what Bhima Bhoi began and talk about. It was called Mahima Dharma, and she has also explained that Mahima Dharma. And Mahima Dharma is also known as the embodiment, the worshipping of nothingness or Sunya, and the emptiness, because they believe, and they're also known as the Alek Niranjan. They're also used to known as one thing side called Alek Niranjan, because they in our Vedantic tradition also, we had the two forms of gods. One is Sakar, one is Nirakar. That whether you have a God in the form, and one is the formlessness. So they are talking about the God in the formlessness, and they're talking about, even if you see in Odia, they say, Nathila Tahi Surya Chandra Tara, Nathila Indra Agni Dhara. There was nothing in terms of the sun, the moon, the sky, the stars, the ocean, the water, nothing was there. What was therein? There was only emptiness. So that, to understand that emptiness, and emptiness can become a source of such knowledge, such inspiration. So which actually, if you translate it into the context of modernity and see the caste and religious dichotomies, you will able to understand the nuances of it. If everything was emptiness, then where does come your caste, where come your creed, where come your religion, where come your language? So in eternally talk about is only in from that emptiness we create the vast expansion of human mind, human thought. And so and that was the religious, and in fact it didn't find so much of what is called popularity, primarily because in one, as he said, Bhima Bhoi was not very highly rated by others at that point of time, primarily because he come from a society, he was not a, what is called bringing, building his one bandwagon, or he was not self promotion. So he was coming from a very simple, family, simple life, living in a one of the most austere way of living, and he was blind. Most importantly, he was also blind, and and he was illiterate. But I don't know how much, whether being an illiterate, how could he express such things? So that also talks about what he call as understanding of knowledge today. It is not, and that is why what Gautam Buddha used to say many years ago, that Ato Deepa Bhava, he yourself become the lamp, enlightenment. So even if in the absence of in education, formal education, in the absence of understanding the Vedic texts and so, he could think, because there was an inner light into him. There is an inner lamp in him that enlightened him and enlightened the people who are around them. So it remained there because many people fail to understand. Because again, once Swami Vivekananda said in some example, he said, it is true, in God has no form, no shape. It depends on how to perceive it. But because the God is infinite and we have a finite mind, so a finite mind, to understand infinity, that has to enhance its own capabilities. What Aravinda called super consciousness. That you should have a super conscious in yourself to transcend all the details and see the infinity of God. But because in many cases we are unable to do so, either he required a guru through which you transcend, he tells us, or otherwise you have a Sakar Brahma in a formal structure where you have to believe in that. So it is in this sense, and since people are unable to understand the depth and the nature of Bhima Bhoi's both composition, his understanding, and his way of evolving from a form to formlessness, it didn't spread anywhere. But it spread to Santaniketan because when people started reading about him, and these are people who are literature people, who are educated people, who are intelligent people, who are knowledgeable people. And consequently, that led to the growth of what is called a Nath Sampradaya and other Sampradayas in Odisha, which because people started reading, realizing, understanding them. And that is why I must say, exactly like Radha Raman Rai's Brahma Samaj, people who are educated and enlightened, they were the first disciples of it. Similarly, with the Bhima Bhoi sense, people who are educated and enlightened, they become the first disciple of this dharma, and they start to spread and through intellectual discourse and so on. So that is why it is very difficult to say that why it didn't spread like Buddhism or other religion, but it's a sectorial one, and probably any religions, if you look at history, spread depending upon the patronage, especially those time it was royal patronage, now it is political patronage or other things. But because Bhima Bhoi never expected anything from them, never pushed through, and neither he had very strong descendants who could push forward. So it didn't become a very successful one. But I think if we look at the popular culture and popular religion and the Mahima Dharma and the Sunya Samhita, the Chindamani, the text of it is remain a very extensive, elaborative, enlightening text. And I'm sure anyone who has some understanding of religion, spiritualism, and literature must read it to realize the context to which you are writing and the content where you are taking you to living this world. But for him, as Professor Giri was talking about, or Ananta was talking about, normally in our Vedic and Upanishad tradition, we find a body-mind dichotomy. Our more focus on consciousness and otherworldliness and things like that. We talk about our mind is free. That is why they call it Hansa. It is moving out like free. But what for Bhima Bhoi and his thinkers, like if you lose your body, you also lose your contact with the ethereal world. So naturally, your body is a mechanism, and that is why they call body as a temple. If you keep the body as a temple, the God insists there. So the body-mind dichotomy is not the dichotomy of spiritual material, but rather he finds what is called a contiguous reality between the two, and that is why that is very transformative in that sense. So it is, it is because body has to build like a temple to establish, to bring the soul into it, and not the soul into it, but reform it, release it, and transcend it. So body becomes a means to transcending the realities of existential world and to become spiritual. So in that sense, that was, I didn't want to give a very long lecture on this, but in any case, I am not a student of spiritualism or religion per se, but my understanding is that, and it can help Ms. Pradhan to understanding something, then I'll be very happy. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Randhir.
Thank you so
for
much.
your answer, sir.
Now it's time to offer vote of thanks. So any other participant, he or she likes to ask any question, please indicate me in the chat box. Or
Professor Giri, could I make an interjection?
yes, please.
I just wanted to point out in response to Professor Gianluigi Segalarba's question that the acceptance of a gender binary in the form of male and female by Narayana Guru is another instance of his qualified acceptance of dualism within the repurposed monistic framework, where monism also includes dualism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Minati Pradhanji, you are invited to offer vote of thanks.
But you wanted to play one Bhima Bhoi wala bhajan, no? That will do that.
Yes, I will do.
Okay. I, Minati Pradhan, from the behalf of Swadhyaya Sahachakra, thank all the participants. Hello, are you playing that now?
No.
Hello.
Please offer the vote of thanks, and I will play after.
Okay. Just I heard some this thing. So I, Minati Pradhan, from the behalf of Swadhyaya Sahachakra, I thank our chief speaker, Dr. Umar Nizarudeen, for his insightful and deep presentation on Narayana Guru. And I also thank our another speaker, Professor Tapan Kumar Mohanty, for his deep and enlightening presentation and for his answering all the questions very detailed. I thank our moderator, Professor Anant Kumar Giri, for planning and week after week giving us every time some new thing to learn. So I thank him profoundly from the bottom of my heart. I thank Professor Gianluigi for being a consistent participant for every webinar and giving his opinions and insightful talk and enlightening us with his knowledge. So I thank all the participants on the Zoom platform and in the Facebook platform for making it joining us every time. So at the last, not the least, I thank our convener, Professor Randhir Kumar Gautam, for planning and executing all the webinars very meticulously and very beautifully. Thank you all.
Thank you. So you can let me share the screen, and with this song, we want to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah.